Your Honor, I'll work for free for the rest of my life. Clean your house, wash your car, anything you want. Just please, don't send my little brother to juvenile detention. The words echoed through courtroom 7 as Marcus Williams, 19, fell to his knees before Judge Harrison's bench. His voice cracked with desperation that made every person in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. The sound of his knees hitting the marble floor reverberated like a gunshot through the otherwise silent courtroom. Judge Harrison, confined to his wheelchair for the past 3 years after a car accident, stared down at the young man with a mixture of surprise and disgust. His manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the armrest of his expensive wheelchair. Mr. Williams, this is highly inappropriate. Stand up immediately. But Marcus remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face, his hands clasped together in a gesture of pure desperation. Please, sir. My brother Danny is only 14. He made a mistake, but he's not like our father. He's not a criminal. He's an honor student, sir. He volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. The courtroom fell silent except for muffled sobs from the gallery where Danny Williams sat in orange juvenile detention uniform, barely looking old enough to be in middle school. His thin frame seemed swallowed by the oversized clothes, and his eyes held the same desperate hope as his older brother's. Dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights in a facility meant for much older, much more dangerous kids. Marcus had spent the last 5 years raising Danny alone after their father was sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery. Working double shifts at Peterson's warehouse, sleeping 4 hours a night, making sure Danny did his homework and stayed out of trouble. He'd attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game. Everything had been going perfectly until one stupid night changed everything. The public defender, Mr. Rodriguez, overworked man with coffee stains on his tie, barely looked up from his notes as he mumbled through Danny's case. He'd clearly given up before the hearing even started, another attorney drowning in cases he couldn't possibly handle with the attention they deserved. The defendant stole a car and led police on a chase through downtown, continued the prosecutor, Ms. Peterson, reading from her notes with cold efficiency. Her perfectly pressed suit and rehearsed delivery suggested she'd given this exact speech dozens of times before. This shows a pattern of criminal behavior that requires immediate intervention. What she didn't mention was that Danny had stolen the car to rush his diabetic girlfriend to the hospital when she went into shock at 2 a.m. and no ambulance was available in their neighborhood. What she didn't say was that the chase lasted 3 blocks before Danny pulled over voluntarily at the emergency room entrance, begging the paramedics to help Sophia before they arrested him. The girlfriend's mother, Mrs. Gonzalez, sat in the back row sobbing quietly. Her daughter was alive because of Danny's actions, but her testimony had been deemed irrelevant to the charges by the prosecution. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked at the case file with the bored expression of a man who'd already made his decision before hearing the evidence. Mr. Danny Williams, you've been charged with grand theft auto and evading arrest. These are serious felonies that carry significant penalties, even for juveniles. Marcus jumped to his feet, his voice rising with panic that came from 5 years of fighting to keep his family together. He was saving someone's life. Sophia Gonzalez is alive because of what my brother did. Her blood sugar dropped to dangerous levels, and she was having seizures. The nearest hospital that takes uninsured patients is 15 miles away. Sit down, Mr. Williams, or I'll hold you in contempt, Judge Harrison snapped, his patience wearing thin. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been desperate, never been powerless, never had to choose between following the law and saving a life. But something flickered in the judge's eyes when Marcus mentioned working for free for the rest of his life. A strange interest that lasted only a fraction of a second before his professional mask returned. His fingers stopped drumming against his wheelchair, and he leaned forward slightly, as if Marcus had said something unexpectedly intriguing. The bailiff, Officer Martinez, stepped forward to restrain Marcus, but Judge Harrison raised his hand to stop him. Wait. Mr. Williams, repeat what you said about working for free. Marcus wiped his tears with the back of his sleeve, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the hearing began. Anything you need, Your Honor. I'll clean your house, maintain your property, work in your garden. I don't need money, just food and a place to sleep. Please, don't destroy my brother's future over one mistake made to save someone's life. The courtroom gallery watched in stunned silence as this desperate young man offered to sacrifice his freedom for his brother's. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys as she witnessed something that felt more like a slave auction than a judicial proceeding. What nobody in that courtroom knew was that Judge Harrison had been secretly investigating something far more sinister than a teenager's desperate attempt to save a life. And Marcus Williams, son of prisoner number 47291, was about to become an unexpected piece in a puzzle that would shake the entire justice system. Judge Harrison's expensive Italian leather briefcase sat beside his wheelchair, containing documents that would horrify any decent person. Financial records, contracts with private facilities, and correspondence with people who viewed children as commodities rather than human beings. The way Judge Harrison's fingers tightened around his gavel when Marcus mentioned lifelong service suggested this wasn't the first time someone had made such an offer in his courtroom. If you're curious about stories where desperation meets corruption in the most unexpected ways, subscribe to see how one brother's sacrifice would expose secrets that powerful people kill to protect. Judge Harrison leaned back in his wheelchair, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he savored the moment of absolute power over the Williams family. His fingers traced the edge of his expensive Rolex watch, a gift that few people knew had been purchased with money earned from ruining young lives. "Mr. Williams, your offer is interesting. But I don't need servants. What I need is respect for the law." He paused deliberately, letting the words sink in while his eyes scanned the gallery, noting every face, every potential witness to what was about to unfold. The silence stretched painfully as Judge Harrison pretended to consider Marcus's desperate plea. In reality, he'd already decided Danny's fate the moment he'd seen the case file with the familiar stamp from Vincent Torres's organization. Another young defendant, another opportunity to feed the machine that had been making him wealthy for years. "However," the judge continued, his voice dropping to a tone that made the courtroom feel like a tomb, "I find your family's pattern of behavior troubling. Your father, armed robbery. Now your brother, car theft and evading arrest. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it, Mr. Williams?" Marcus felt his chest tighten with rage at the calculated cruelty in the judge's voice. This wasn't about justice. It was about humiliation, about grinding a desperate family into dust for sport. "Your Honor, with respect, my brother is nothing like our father. Danny has never even had a detention at school. He tutors younger kids in math. He's never hurt anyone in his life." "Yet here we are," Judge Harrison replied with mock sadness, shuffling through papers he wasn't actually reading. "Daniel Williams, Grand Theft Auto. Leading police on a dangerous chase through populated areas. Endangering innocent lives for what? A girlfriend's medical emergency that could have been handled by calling proper emergency services." Mrs. Gonzalez stood up shakily from the gallery, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your Honor, please. My daughter Sophia would have died if Danny hadn't acted. The ambulances in our neighborhood take over an hour to respond. He saved my baby's life." Judge Harrison's expression hardened with irritation at being interrupted. "Ma'am, sit down immediately or I'll have you removed. This court doesn't make decisions based on emotional testimony, but on facts and law." The bailiff gently guided Mrs. Gonzalez back to her seat as she sobbed quietly. Marcus watched the interaction with growing horror, realizing that Judge Harrison wasn't just indifferent to Danny's circumstances, he was actively enjoying the family's suffering. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice gaining strength from the pain he was inflicting, "Mr. Marcus Williams, your emotional outburst and inappropriate offer of servitude tells me everything I need to know about this family's respect for proper legal procedures." Marcus's public defender finally spoke up weakly. "Your Honor, the defendant has no prior record, excellent grades, and multiple character references from teachers and community members." "All irrelevant," Judge Harrison dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The defendant committed serious felonies. Period." He paused again, this time studying Marcus with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. What Marcus didn't know was that Judge Harrison had been receiving detailed reports about the Williams family for weeks. Their financial struggles, Marcus's exhausting work schedule, their complete isolation from extended family. Perfect candidates for the system he'd perfected over years of practice. "Daniel Williams," Judge Harrison announced, his gavel hovering over the bench like an executioner's axe, "I hereby sentence you to 2 years in juvenile detention at Riverside Youth Rehabilitation Center, followed by 3 years of probation." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. 2 years for a first-time offense committed to save someone's life. Even the prosecutor looked surprised at the severity of the sentence. Mrs. Gonzalez's anguished cry of "No, please no," echoed through the room. The gavel hit the bench with finality that shattered Marcus's world into pieces he wasn't sure could ever be put back together. Danny's strangled cry of "No, Marcus, help me," tore through his brother's heart like broken glass. "Wait," Marcus shouted, desperation making his voice crack and break. "Please, Your Honor, I meant what I said earlier. I'll do anything. Clean your house, maintain your property, work your garden. No pay, no questions asked. Just food and shelter. Please don't destroy my brother's life for trying to save someone." Judge Harrison's eyes glinted with something that made Marcus's skin crawl, not consideration, but amusement at watching him beg. "Are you suggesting I'm corrupt, Mr. Williams? That I would exchange personal favors for judicial verdicts? Because that would be a very serious accusation indeed." "No, sir, Marcus stammered, realizing he'd walked into a trap. "Because if that were the case," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice dropping to an ominous whisper that carried clearly through the silent courtroom, "it would constitute contempt of court, obstruction of justice, and attempted bribery. The kind of accusations that could land someone in prison for a very, very long time. Just like their father." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the judge was threatening him with the same fate that had destroyed their family 5 years ago. He'd seen that same calculated intimidation before, when social services came to check on them after their father's arrest. The caseworker who suggested the boys might be better off separated had used identical threatening language. What Judge Harrison didn't know was that Marcus had learned to be very, very careful about the adults who held power over his life. While everyone focused on his emotional breakdown, his sharp eyes had caught details that would have escaped most people in his position. The judge's expensive watch, worth more than Marcus made in 6 months. The designer shoes that cost more than their monthly rent. The way he'd instinctively covered a folder marked private residential services when Marcus approached the bench. Most telling of all was the slight nod Judge Harrison had given to someone in the back of the courtroom, someone Marcus couldn't see clearly but whose presence obviously mattered to the judge's decision-making process. Danny was sobbing now, reaching desperately toward his brother as 2 bailiffs moved to restrain him. "Marcus, don't let them take me. You promised you'd protect me. You promised we'd stay together no matter what happened." The sound of his little brother's terror cut through Marcus like a serrated blade. This was the same boy who still checked the locks twice before bed, because their father used to bring dangerous people to their apartment. The same boy who taught himself to cook elaborate meals at age 9 because someone had to make dinner when Marcus worked 16-hour shifts to keep them afloat. "Your Honor," Marcus tried one more time, his voice barely above a whisper, fighting back tears that threatened to completely break him down. "He's just a child who tried to save someone's life. Please show mercy." Judge Harrison's expression turned glacial, all pretense of judicial consideration vanishing completely. "Mr. Williams, your family's criminal history speaks for itself. Your father, armed robbery with a deadly weapon. Now your brother, felony car theft and evading arrest. The pattern is abundantly clear to anyone with eyes to see." But Marcus caught something in the judge's tone that others missed, a practiced, rehearsed delivery, like he'd given this exact speech multiple times before to other desperate families. How many other brothers and sisters had been separated by this man's gavel? How many other families had been destroyed by sentences that seemed designed more for cruelty than justice? As the bailiffs began leading Danny away, the terrified 14-year-old looked back one last time with eyes that would haunt Marcus for months to come. "Marcus, you promised you wouldn't let anyone split us up. You swore on Mom's grave that we'd always have each other." The words hit Marcus harder than any physical blow could have. He'd made that promise 5 years ago, kneeling beside their mother's hospital bed in the final days, swearing to her and to Danny that they'd always be a family no matter what challenges they faced. Judge Harrison was already reviewing the next case file, dismissing the Williams family's tragedy as just another routine proceeding in his busy day. His assistant handed him a coffee and a folder of afternoon appointments, the family's destroyed lives already forgotten in the administrative machinery of his courtroom. But what Judge Harrison couldn't dismiss was the way Marcus Williams remained standing in that courtroom, not moving toward the exit like every other defeated family member he'd processed over the years. Instead of leaving broken and hopeless, Marcus was watching, learning, memorizing every detail about the man who just destroyed his world with what seemed like genuine pleasure. Because somewhere in the last 30 minutes, something fundamental had shifted inside the 19-year-old. The scared teenager begging for mercy had been replaced by someone much more dangerous, someone with absolutely nothing left to lose and a growing suspicion that what had just happened wasn't justice, but something far more sinister. The next case was called, and Marcus finally turned to leave the courtroom. But Judge Harrison's assistant couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the young man's parting look held a promise that had nothing to do with servitude and everything to do with a reckoning that was just beginning to take shape. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in the county library at 2 a.m., surrounded by old newspapers, court records, and a laptop he'd borrowed from his supervisor at the warehouse. The overnight security guard had given up asking why the grieving teenager spent every night researching instead of sleeping. Another family destroyed by the system, Marcus whispered to himself, staring at a newspaper clipping from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Local teen sentenced to adult prison despite community outcry." The case was eerily familiar. 16-year-old Maria Santos had been caught with her boyfriend's marijuana, barely enough for personal use. Judge Harrison had sentenced her to 3 years in adult prison, ignoring her straight A grades and full scholarship to State University. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't the harsh sentence. It was the photo in the corner showing Maria being led away in shackles. In the background, partially hidden by shadows, stood the same man who'd nodded to Judge Harrison during Danny's trial. Marcus had found 17 similar cases over the past month. All young defendants. All harsh sentences that destroyed promising futures. All with the same mysterious figure lurking in courtroom photos. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny, "Marcus, please get me out. The older kids here are dangerous. I'm scared." The message broke his concentration for a moment, flooding him with guilt and rage. But Marcus had learned to channel those emotions into something more productive than tears. Every night, he added another piece to a puzzle that was becoming increasingly clear and absolutely horrifying. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Williams?" Marcus looked up to see a woman in her 30s, professional but tired-looking, holding a manila folder thick with documents. "I'm Sarah Chun, investigative reporter with the Herald Tribune. I've been watching you research Judge Harrison's cases for 3 weeks now. Mind if I sit down?" Marcus's first instinct was to run. Talking to reporters felt dangerous, especially when you're the son of a convicted felon digging into a judge's business. But something about Sarah's direct manner and the exhaustion in her eyes suggested she wasn't there to exploit his story. "You're investigating him too," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, opening her folder to reveal photographs, financial records, and what looked like surveillance footage. "For 2 years. Ever since my nephew got 15 years for a first-time drug offense in Harrison's courtroom." She spread the documents across the table, and Marcus felt his heart race. Phone records showing calls between Judge Harrison and the mysterious man from the courtroom photos. Bank statements revealing payments to something called Riverside Youth Rehabilitation Center. Property records showing Judge Harrison owned shares in private prison facilities. "His name is Vincent Torres," Sarah continued, pointing to the shadowy figure Marcus had been tracking. "He's a private contractor who supplies workers to agricultural and manufacturing companies. Cheap labor, if you know what I mean." Marcus's blood turned to ice as the pieces clicked into place. The kids he sentences, they're not going to regular juvenile detention. Riverside Youth Rehabilitation Center is a work camp, Sarah confirmed. Technically legal, marketed as character building through honest labor. But the kids work 12-hour shifts picking crops and manufacturing goods for companies that pay Torres, who pays Harrison. The room seemed to spin as Marcus realized what had happened to Danny. His little brother wasn't just imprisoned, he was being used as slave labor to make 2 corrupt men wealthy. "Why haven't you published this story?" Marcus asked, his voice barely controlled. Sarah's expression darkened. "Because Torres has connections everywhere. Police, social services, other judges. The last reporter who got too close had evidence disappear from his office and ended up facing bogus assault charges. I need proof that can't be stolen or discredited." Marcus stared at the documents, his mind racing. Judge Harrison thought he was dealing with just another broken teenager, another grieving family member who'd eventually give up and move on. What the judge didn't know was that Marcus had something most people didn't: 5 years of experience surviving in a system designed to crush people like him. "I might know how to get that proof," Marcus said quietly, pulling out his phone to show Sarah the dozens of photos he'd taken during his research. But I'm going to need your help with something that's probably going to sound completely insane. Sarah looked at the photos, then at Marcus's determined expression, and slowly smiled. Kid, after 2 years of chasing this story, insane might be exactly what we need. What neither of them knew was that Vincent Torres had been watching Marcus's nightly library visits for the past week. And tomorrow, he planned to make the Williams brothers' reunion much more permanent than either of them would ever want. 6 months later, Judge Harrison sat behind his bench reviewing what he thought was just another routine sentencing hearing. The defendant was Maria Santos, the same girl he'd sent to adult prison 2 years ago, now facing new charges after her release. What the judge didn't know was that Maria was wearing a wire, courtesy of the FBI task force that had been building a case against him for months. "Your Honor," Maria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "before you sentence me, I have something to confess. 2 years ago, when you sent me to Riverside, Vincent Torres approached my family. He said if we paid him $5,000, he could arrange for me to work in the kitchen instead of the fields." Judge Harrison's face went pale. "Ms. Santos, that's a very serious accusation." "We have the receipts," Marcus Williams said, standing up from the gallery. In his hands were folders thick with evidence, and beside him sat Sarah Chun with a recording device that had been capturing every word. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Marcus approached the bench. But this time, he wasn't kneeling or begging. This time, he held the power. "We have bank records showing payments from Torres to your offshore accounts," Marcus continued, his voice calm and clear. "We have recorded phone conversations where you discuss which kids to send were based on how much their families can pay. We have testimony from 43 families whose children were trafficked through your courtroom." Judge Harrison's hands trembled as he reached for his gavel, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Most importantly, Your Honor, we have video footage from inside Riverside showing 14-year-old children working 16-hour shifts in 100-degree heat, including my brother Danny." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and FBI agent Rivera walked in with Daniel Williams beside him. Danny was thin and scarred, but alive and free. The reunion between the brothers was wordless but powerful. Marcus had kept his promise after all. "Vincent Torres was arrested this morning," Agent Rivera announced to the stunned courtroom, "along with 12 accomplices involved in this child labor trafficking ring. Mr. Torres has agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence." Judge Harrison tried to stand, but his wheelchair trapped him behind the bench like a cage. "This is ridiculous. I'm a federal judge. You can't just." "Actually, we can." Agent Rivera smiled grimly as 2 officers approached the bench with handcuffs. "Judge Harrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, human trafficking, and corruption under color of law." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the man who had destroyed so many lives was handcuffed in his own chair. But the most devastating moment came when Sarah Chun stood up and began reading from her notebook. "For 2 years, Judge Harrison, you've been selling children to work camps for profit. 47 kids, ages 13 to 17, generating over $2 million in illegal revenue. But what you never realized is that every single one of those families kept records. Every payment, every threat, every promise of leniency that never came." As Harrison was wheeled out of his own courtroom, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not revenge, but justice. Real, systematic, undeniable justice. Danny grabbed his brother's arm, tears streaming down his face. "Marcus, how did you do all this?" Marcus looked around the courtroom, at the families who were finally going to get their children back, at the reporter who had risked everything to help him, at the FBI agents who had listened when everyone else ignored their pleas for help. "I learned something these past months, Danny. The system isn't broken, it's designed exactly the way some people want it. But when enough people refuse to accept that design, when they work together and fight smart instead of just fighting angry, that's when real change happens." The gavel Harrison had used to destroy so many lives lay abandoned on the bench. But this time, justice didn't need a gavel to make itself heard. 2 years later, Marcus Williams stood at the podium of the National Youth Advocacy Center, addressing a room full of social workers, attorneys, and policymakers. The same young man who had once begged on his knees in a corrupt courtroom now wore a law school graduation cap and spoke with the authority of someone who had survived the system and changed it. The Riverside case led to the closure of 14 illegal youth work camps across 6 states, Marcus announced to thunderous applause. 47 children were reunited with their families, and new federal oversight laws now monitor private juvenile facilities. In the audience, Danny Williams, now 17 and preparing for college on a full academic scholarship, beamed with pride at his older brother. The traumatic months at Riverside had left scars, but they'd also revealed Danny's incredible resilience and natural leadership abilities. He now spent his free time mentoring other kids who'd been through the system. Sarah Chun, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for her exposé of the trafficking ring, raised her hand from the press section. "Marcus, what happened to Judge Harrison and Vincent Torres?" Marcus's expression grew serious. Judge Harrison received 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy and human trafficking. His appeals have all been denied, and his legal fees bankrupted him completely. Vincent Torres got 15 years and is currently serving his time in the same adult facility where many of his victims were illegally held. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The man who had profited from child labor was now experiencing the prison system from the inside, stripped of power and privilege. More importantly, Marcus continued, every family affected by their crimes received compensation from the seized assets. The money Harrison made from selling children is now funding college scholarships for his victims. Dr. Patricia Monroe, the new director of Family Court Services, stood up to address the crowd. The Williams brothers didn't just expose corruption, they created a blueprint for how families can fight back against systemic abuse. Their case led to the creation of the National Trafficking Hotline and mandatory recording of all juvenile sentencing hearings. As the presentation ended, Marcus walked outside where Danny was waiting by their car. The same warehouse parking lot where Marcus had once cried alone after 16-hour shifts was now the site of the community center they'd helped establish for at-risk youth. "Remember when you used to promise me that everything would be okay?" Danny asked, looking at the building that now served dozens of kids every day. Marcus smiled, remembering the scared 19-year-old who had knelt in that courtroom, desperate and powerless. "I remember promising I wouldn't let anyone split us up. I just never imagined keeping that promise would end up protecting so many other families too." Their father, who had been released early due to prison overcrowding reforms that Marcus had advocated for, joined them as they walked toward the center. The Williams family wasn't perfect, but they were whole, and they were using their second chance to make sure other families got theirs too. Judge Harrison had tried to break Marcus Williams by taking away everything he cared about. Instead, he had created an advocate who would spend his life ensuring no other child would suffer what Danny had endured. The corrupt judge had given Marcus a purpose bigger than revenge. He had given him a mission. As they entered the youth center, Marcus reflected on how far they'd all come. The best revenge hadn't been destroying his enemies, it had been building something they could never tear down. A system that protected kids instead of exploiting them. A community that lifted families up instead of tearing them apart. The boy who had once offered to become a slave to save his brother had instead become the man who freed dozens of children from modern slavery. Harrison had tried to make Marcus powerless, but ended up creating someone far more dangerous to corrupt systems everywhere, someone who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. If this story of courage and justice inspired you, subscribe to our channel for more true accounts of ordinary people who refuse to let powerful systems crush them. Sometimes the best way to honor those who tried to break you is to build something beautiful from the pieces they left behind.